Welcome to this episode of B2B Bites. Today I'm joined by Jason Greenwood. He is a leading expert in the world of B2B commerce. He's the founder and lead consultant at Greenwood Consulting, where he helps businesses leverage the power of e-commerce to drive growth and success. Today, Jason and I are going to be discussing manufacturers who choose to open a direct-to-consumer channel. A really interesting topic. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to speak with you, Lance. We've done lots of these types of events and activities together online, so it's not our first time chatting. It's not our first rodeo together, is it?
It is not, but this is a great topic. So we're looking at manufacturers who have been selling through distributors previously and have suddenly scratched their head and said, that distribution is taking some of my margin. I'd like to try a direct-to-consumer channel. But there are lots of complexities there, lots to consider operationally, marketing, potentially channel conflict, and we're going to get into all of it. Let's start with potentially some of the operational challenges that this business might face. Can you help our watchers today and listeners understand what some of those challenges might be for those manufacturers?
Absolutely. And look, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of these manufacturing brands are saying, hey, this wholesale channel's great. We do fantastic volumes. We have high AOVs. We have ridiculously high CLVs. And so this is great. This channel's fantastic. But we don't have as much zero and first party data on our customers as we would like to have. And we don't have a direct relationship with the end customers of our product. So what they want to do is they want to go to market and they say, well, look, instead of maybe setting up a physical retail store as our first foray into retail, maybe we're going to just do an e-commerce website, a direct-to-consumer e-commerce website. Whether it's for products that we manufacture and or distribute, we're going to now sell to end consumers of these products as opposed to the businesses that we've traditionally sold to. Now, there's a whole lot of differences in what those channels expect from their supplier, right? In the B2B world, it's all about fast, frictionless purchasing, on account typically with special trade pricing, right? At scale, at volume, right? In the D2C world, customers expect a much different buying experience, a much different level of customer service. And of course, we're shipping small items door to door, shipping individual items usually, as opposed to cartons, pallets, and containers. So from a logistics perspective, if a B2B brand is currently either warehousing and shipping their own products and onboarding their own products and then shipping those out, they're used to shipping cartons, pallets, and containers. They're not used to shipping individual sachets of products, right? And so this requires a massive change, typically not only of processes, but of systems to support D2C scale of smaller individual parcels. It also typically requires them to think about the carriers that they're typically working with. In the B2B world, most of the time, shipping is done via bulk carriers. And oftentimes those are legacy bulk carriers that do not have an API. They don't have any automation in the way that we get orders into their hands. Usually it's a CSV that gets mailed off or shunted onto an SFTP server that the carrier then downloads, and then they know they need to come and get that order from us and pick up the container from us. It's a very different world in the D2C world. So everything kind of has to change, all the way from the type of logistics that we do, the type of warehousing that we do, the type of systems and technologies that we use to manage the pick, pack, and dispatch process. And then also the communication that we give to our customers tends to be very different. Typically in the D2C world, orders are completely prepaid in advance before we ever ship the goods, very different to the B2B world. It also requires us to send much more updated and much more frequent information about the process of their order as it goes through the process to get out the door to them. And then finally, from a customer service, both pre-sales, during, and post-sales, from a customer service perspective, this is a very different proposition than in the B2B world. In the B2B world, we're dealing with accounts, not individual customers. And so we're trying to keep an entire account happy in the B2B world, which by definition means we tend to have very small number of accounts versus the very large number of direct-to-consumer customers we typically have and we typically see in the D2C world. Final thing I'll say, from a marketing perspective, if you're going to go into the D2C world, you better be pretty shit hot at digital marketing, because you're going to need to be to find D2C success, and or you're going to have some very, very good marketing partners to help you find success in the D2C space, because it is no longer like the Field of Dreams where you build it and they will come. You have to go out and grab them by the neck.
Wow, that was 4 minutes of absolute gold. So much to unpack, so much for our audience to take away. There are a couple of areas I want to double click in. One we didn't talk about there, which is channel conflict. I am a manufacturer, right? I already have distribution channels, and now I'm going to go direct to consumer. Some of those people selling my products may not be very happy. How should I think about this? How do I approach it? It's a touchy subject. What advice do you have for manufacturers in that space to avoid conflict with their other channels?
That is such a fantastic question. And I have an anecdote from Australia. Once again, I will not say the specific brand, but I was working with a brand, a famous manufacturing watch brand, a global watch brand. I was dealing with their. They didn't have a distributor in Australia. They distributed their own products in Australia, and they wanted to. So in Australia, like 98% of their revenues were B2B. The 2% that was not B2B was their annual warehouse sale that they ran once or twice a year, literally out the back of the factory, and they would open that up for a couple of days every year at the end of a season, say for example, to have basically like a warehouse clearance, and people could literally drive up and they would have their mobile tills and they could buy in bulk out of the back of their warehouse. But other than that, their business was, for all intents and purposes, 100% B2B through the retail channel. Now, what they wanted to do is they said, man, we think we can do this really, really well through a direct-to-consumer e-commerce website. We think we can do it better. We think, and the challenge that they were facing, I'll tell you, one of the motivators for them wasn't just better margin. It was the fact that they had no single retail channel that fully represented their entire SKU line. So these retailers that were buying off of them would cherry pick the SKUs that they think would sell the most in their store. So they weren't going to buy the entire catalog of products. They bought the products that matched their retail brand best and matched their customers best. And so what they would often find themselves in the situation where at the end of a season or at the end of a quarter, and especially when they were doing new model changeovers, they'd be left with a whole lot of product that never even made it into the retail channel because their retailers simply cherry picked from the range. And so they said, well, look, at least if we sell direct to consumer, every single SKU that we have available will be available to our consumers in the Australian market. And so I recommended to them, look, you need to be having conversations with your retail channel early and often. You need to tell them, basically you need to be having this discussion sooner rather than later, because what you don't want is to go and spend, $100, $200, $300, $400, $500,000 on this amazing D2C experience, and then all of a sudden lose all of your wholesale business because they say, well, we don't want to compete with the manufacturer in our home market. They chose not to do that. They said, we're going to do this in stealth. We're going to go and build it. We're going to go to market, and they're just going to have to suck it up. They're just going to have to accept that a certain percentage of our customers want to buy direct through us. And funnily enough, they did one thing smart, which was they did not plan to compete on price with their retailers. They were going to sell at full RRP online, but they just felt that by having the entire range that they could get to their consumer overnight or nearly overnight in almost every part of Australia, that they would be able to pick up a significant part of market share that they were not able to access through their retailers. They went through the process, took about 9 months to build the website. They went live. Within 2 months of being live, all of their retailers banded together and came to them and said, if you do not make your website non-transactional, we are all going to collectively drop your product. Now, this was something, I can't remember the exact numbers, this is a few years ago now. I think they were doing something like 60 or 70 million dollars. It was just under $100 million in wholesale sales through their business in Australia. And that entire chunk of revenue was put under threat because they did not have a dialogue with their retailers before they set up a D2C channel. So this can happen, and it can happen very, very easily. What usually happens, though, is if you have the conversation early and often with your retailers and you explain to them why you are doing it, and you explain ways in which this will actually benefit them, and you actually go into the architecture of the solution and the way that these retailers could perhaps get credit for the sale in some way, if it's within a certain catchment, for example, where they can get a percentage of the profit of those sales that are secured through the website. There's ways to deal with this. There are ways to have these conversations where your current wholesale channel does not feel threatened and actually sees some significant benefit through what you are doing in the market, right? And especially when it comes to seeding the brand into market, especially if you're going into a new market, then having that D2C channel can help seed demand for the brand at no risk to the retailer. So I said that anecdote to say that if you think you're going to be able to do this under the radar and spring it on your retailers without them noticing or without them having an issue with it, it's probably unlikely, particularly if you are a large global brand that is very well known.
That is a fantastic story, a cautionary tale. But the part that I love, you're seeding the brand, and it can benefit the retailers if you work together. And you can also come up with strategies where maybe you attribute some of those sales to the retailers based on location. And that's a fantastic way to share in some of that success. Jason, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. If you're a manufacturer and you are thinking about opening a D2C channel, you can find Jason on LinkedIn. I'm sure he would be happy to help you in that journey. Jason, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Always a fun time, Lance. Can't wait to do it again soon.